Sarah's mind raced as she sat alone in her office, the weight of her earlier decision bearing down on her. The encounter with Elon Musk had shaken her, but she refused to show weakness. The rules of the bank were sacred, and no amount of fame or power could change that. She had dismissed him. No, she had ejected him, thinking it was a matter of principle. But now, her assistant's words echoed in her mind. He owns the bank. Her fingers tapped the edge of the desk as she replayed the conversation. She had told him to leave, had sent him away without a second thought. But why hadn't she been more careful? The man hadn't acted like someone who owned the place. There was no indication he held such power. His calm demeanor had only fueled her belief that she was in control. Yet, the realization now gnawed at her. What did she really know about the bank she had guarded for years? Minutes felt like hours, and as the weight of responsibility crushed her, she made a decision. She needed to confirm the truth for herself. She needed to understand just who Musk was and why he was here. She stood up abruptly and left the office, her footsteps quick and purposeful as she made her way through the labyrinthine corridors of the bank. The vaults lay ahead, each one a treasure trove holding relics from countless worlds. Each artifact was a key, a piece of a puzzle that connected dimensions beyond imagination. But Musk had spoken of one item in particular, the crystal. She couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't lying. He had to be telling the truth. Upon reaching the central vault, Sarah swiped her keycard and input the necessary codes. The massive door groaned as it opened, revealing the carefully arranged artifacts that lined the shelves. The crystal was there, glowing faintly with a pulsating light that felt almost alive. The sight of it sent a shiver through her, a whisper of unease that she couldn't ignore. Sarah stepped closer, her fingers brushing the edge of the crystal's base. The artifact was old, ancient even, its power radiating in waves that made her skin tingle. She hadn't known its full significance, only that it was one of the most prized possessions of the bank, a symbol of its mission to protect multiversal treasures. She recalled Musk's words. It's the keystone of balance across the multiverse. His claim was bold, but now that she stood before the crystal, it didn't seem so far-fetched. The crystal had always been a mystery, its origins unclear even to the most knowledgeable guardians of the bank. Its energy had always been a point of fascination, but it had been deemed too dangerous to be studied in depth. The weight of the decision loomed over her. She had a duty to protect the bank and its treasures, but if Musk was right, the artifact had to be used, not hoarded. And if he was lying, if he had been manipulating her, then the consequences could be catastrophic. She didn't have the answers, but she knew she had to make a choice. Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice behind her. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Sarah turned to find Musk standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. She could feel the tension in the air between them, the unspoken challenge. The confrontation she had been avoiding had arrived. "I came back to talk, Sarah," Musk continued, stepping into the vault. "You know, I didn't expect this to." Musk took a step closer, his presence commanding yet not threatening. The confidence in his voice softened, but the urgency was unmistakable. "I'm not asking for a favor, Sarah. I'm asking for your help. You're the guardian of this bank. You know as well as I do that the multiverse is in danger. This artifact, it's a linchpin. If it stays locked away, it will cause a ripple effect across every dimension. No one can predict the consequences." Sarah's fingers tightened around the crystal, the weight of his words pressing heavily on her. She had heard rumors, whispers in the halls, that the crystal held untold power, but the bank's primary goal had always been neutrality. Protecting the treasures, ensuring they were never used for personal gain. The balance had to be maintained. But Musk was right about one thing: if the crystal were allowed to remain dormant, the universe might be at risk. "I don't know you," she repeated, her voice steady, though her mind churned. "I don't know who you really are, or what your motives are." Musk seemed to consider her words for a moment before speaking again, his tone less confident but still firm. "You don't need to know me. You need to know what's at stake. The crystal was meant to be used, not hidden. I've tried to explain this to others, but they refuse to listen. That's why I had to come here myself. Sarah's mind raced. She was trained to be cautious, to question anyone who sought access to the bank's secrets. But something in his voice, in his gaze, made her hesitate. This wasn't about personal gain, was it? He wasn't asking for wealth or control over the multiverse. He was asking for something more, something bigger than either of them. What happens if I let you take it? She asked, the question slipping out before she could fully grasp the implications. Musk's eyes flickered with a glimmer of relief, but his expression remained solemn. The balance will be restored. The crystal will fulfill its purpose. I'll use it to realign the dimensions, to stop a war that's been brewing for centuries. It's the only way to prevent a collapse. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. A war? A collapse? These were words she never expected to hear in the hallowed halls of the bank. But Musk's conviction was undeniable. He didn't speak as a man seeking personal glory, but as someone who believed in the greater good. And what if you're wrong? She asked, the question a thin thread of doubt she couldn't quite shake. If I'm wrong, Musk said, his voice quiet but firm, then the consequences will be my burden to bear. But I'm not wrong. I've seen the signs. I've followed the threads. The crystal is the key. The silence between them stretched out, filled with the weight of decisions that could alter the very fabric of reality. Sarah glanced down at the crystal in her hands. Its glow pulsed steadily, almost as though it was waiting, responding to the conversation. For a brief moment, it felt as though the artifact was alive, aware of the stakes at play. She closed her eyes, trying to clear her thoughts, trying to make sense of everything. Musk's words resonated with a truth she couldn't ignore. If there was even a chance that what he said was real, she couldn't afford to stand in his way. But if he was wrong, if his actions endangered everything the bank had worked to protect, then her decision could be catastrophic. I'll help you, she said finally, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. But if anything goes wrong, you'll be held accountable. Musk's gaze softened. You have my word. And I'll be the first to face the consequences if this fails. Sarah nodded, the weight of her decision sinking in. She had never imagined she would find herself in this position. She was the protector of secrets, the one who ensured that the treasures of the multiverse remained safe. But now, she was about to make a choice that would define her legacy, one that could reshape the course of history. With a deep breath, she handed the crystal to Musk, the energy from it humming in her palms. For a moment, she hesitated, the gravity of the action pressing down on her. But then, as if guided by some unseen force, she released it into his hands. Musk took the crystal, his fingers closing around it with a sense of reverence. The glow of the artifact intensified, casting long shadows across the vault as if the world itself was holding its breath. Sarah watched as he raised the crystal to his chest, a quiet determination in his eyes. The bank, the multiverse, their lives, all of it seemed to hinge on the next few moments. What now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Musk's eyes met hers, filled with a mix of resolve and something softer, gratitude, perhaps. Now we change everything. The energy in the room surged, a ripple passing through the air as Musk activated the crystal. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze, as though time itself had been suspended. Then, without warning, the room was bathed in blinding light. Sarah's vision blurred, the edges of reality warping as though the very fabric of existence was being torn and woven anew. She braced herself, unsure of what would come next. Would the bank's mission survive this upheaval? Would the multiverse shift in ways she couldn't foresee? Or had they just made an irrevocable mistake? As the light faded, Sarah blinked, her surroundings returning to normal. But something had changed. The air was different, charged with an energy she couldn't quite explain. Musk stood before her, the crystal now glowing faintly in his hand. Is it done? She asked, her heart pounding. Musk looked at her, a quiet smile forming on his lips. It's just beginning. And in that moment, Sarah realized that her decision had been more than just about an artifact. It had been about leadership, about standing up for what was right, even in the face of uncertainty. The world around Sarah seemed to hum with an energy she had never felt before. The crystal had shifted something deep within the very structure of the bank, and now she could feel the tremors of change running through the walls. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, as though a storm had passed through, leaving a new kind of stillness behind. The multiverse was no longer the same. It was reordering itself, the fabric of reality itself warping and shifting in response to Musk's actions. "What have we done?" Sarah murmured under her breath, though she knew the question was more for herself than for Musk. Musk turned to face her, his expression calm, though his eyes glinted with a light she hadn't seen before. There was a certainty there, a quiet assurance that made her wonder how much of this had been preordained. The artifact's glow was dimming now, as if the pulse of its energy had reached its peak. "We've done what needed to be done," Musk said quietly, but his voice was firm, as if he was speaking not just to her but to the universe itself. "This is the first step in restoring balance, in setting things right." Sarah stood frozen for a moment, grappling with the enormity of what had just transpired. The crystal had responded to Musk, yes, but it wasn't just a simple matter of wielding power. It had chosen him. There was something undeniable in the way he had interacted with it, something primal and deep within the fabric of reality itself. Musk was no longer just a businessman. He was a force, a catalyst for something far greater than either of them had anticipated. "What now?" Sarah finally asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "How do we ensure this doesn't spiral out of control?" Musk took a breath and glanced around the vault, his gaze sweeping over the now quiet artifacts that lined the walls. The light in his eyes was no longer one of uncertainty, but of resolve. "We have to make sure we don't let the power go to our heads. This isn't about gaining control, it's about restoring balance. It's about leadership in the truest sense, accountability, empathy, and knowing when to let go." Sarah's mind raced. She had spent her life in the service of this bank, a place that had guarded the most dangerous and mysterious artifacts of the multiverse. But what if everything she had known was wrong? What if the purpose of the bank had been to hold back progress, to stifle the necessary changes that could have saved countless worlds from destruction? She felt her grip on the past slipping, her understanding of right and wrong becoming more fluid with each passing second. "Are we doing the right thing?" she asked, almost in a whisper. Musk stepped forward, his voice steady and confident. "We're doing what needs to be done. We're taking responsibility for the future. That means making difficult choices, accepting the consequences of our actions, and working together to ensure that no one, becomes too powerful, too arrogant, too blind to the greater good." Sarah swallowed hard, trying to reconcile the man before her with the corporate titan she had seen on the news. This wasn't the same Elon Musk she had expected, the man who had worn the MAGA hat, the man she had dismissed as a threat, as someone too dangerous to trust. This man had a vision that seemed to be grounded in something more noble than she had ever imagined. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. If Musk truly believed in balance, in redemption, then perhaps there was still a chance for the multiverse. Perhaps it wasn't too late to change things. Perhaps it wasn't too late for her to change, too. "Do you think people will understand?" she asked. "Do you think they'll accept what we've done?" Musk's gaze softened. "No, not at first. There will be resistance. People will question our motives, fear what they don't understand. But if we stay true to our mission, if we remain steadfast in our commitment to empathy, inclusion, and fairness, then they will come to see the truth. It's not about forcing anyone to accept us. It's about showing them why it's necessary. Why we must work together, no matter our differences." Sarah felt a sense of calm settle over her, even as the weight of her responsibility grew heavier. She was no longer just a gatekeeper of the bank's secrets. She was a part of something bigger. She was part of a team, a force for good, fighting to right the wrongs of countless worlds. The journey ahead would be difficult, fraught with obstacles and doubts. But she had to believe that it was worth it. "We'll need allies," she said, her voice steady now. "We can't do this alone." Musk nodded. "We will. And we'll need to be open to change, to new ideas. The world is shifting, and so must we. But the key to true leadership is knowing when to listen, when to adapt, and when to stand firm in the face of adversity. It was a lot to take in, but Sarah knew one thing: this wasn't just about the crystal anymore. This was about a new kind of leadership. A leadership based on empathy, accountability, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right, no matter the cost. "We'll do it together," Sarah said, the words feeling solid as she spoke them. "We'll restore the balance." Musk looked at her, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Yes. Together." The weight of the crystal's power had passed from her hands, but she knew that the real challenge was just beginning. They had unlocked something far greater than they had intended. Now, it was their responsibility to make sure that power didn't consume them. They would need to lead with humility, to be accountable not just to each other, but to the multiverse itself. Only then could they hope to restore what had been lost. As Sarah and Musk left the vault, their path uncertain but their resolve clear, they knew that they had already made history. Now, it was time to ensure that history would remember them not as the people who wielded power, but as the ones who used it to create a world where balance, justice, and empathy could reign. The multiverse shifted around Sarah and Musk as they ventured deeper into the core of the bank. The walls felt thinner now, as though the weight of reality was bending under the strain of the crystal's awakening. The air was dense, charged with an energy that Sarah could almost taste. It felt like the calm before a storm, but there was something else too, a promise, or perhaps a warning. The future was unpredictable now, but they had made their choice. There was no turning back. As they walked in silence, Sarah's thoughts raced. The task ahead was monumental. They had chosen to release the crystal, to restore the balance between worlds. But what would that mean for everyone else? What would it mean for the bank, for its guardians, for the countless lives that were unknowingly affected by their actions? Musk, sensing her inner turmoil, broke the silence. "I know this is a lot to process. I know you're wondering if we've done the right thing. I can see it in your eyes." Sarah glanced at him, surprised by his perceptiveness. "I'm wondering how we fix what we've started. What if the world, the multiverse, isn't ready for this?" Musk's expression softened, a flicker of something almost human beneath his usual guarded demeanor. "The world is never ready. Change doesn't wait for permission. The hardest part is always the first step. After that, everything else falls into place." "But what if it doesn't?" Sarah's voice was a whisper now, barely audible over the hum of the space around them. "What if we're wrong? What if we've disrupted something we can't repair?" The weight of her words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Musk didn't respond. Instead, he looked ahead, as though searching for the right words. Then, with a deep breath, he spoke again. "There's always a cost," he said quietly. "When you challenge the status quo, when you disrupt the balance of power, there will always be resistance. There will always be fear. But we can't be paralyzed by that fear. We have to act. We have to believe that what we're doing is for the greater good." Sarah nodded, though she still wasn't entirely convinced. Musk's words had a certain truth to them, but it was hard to ignore the creeping doubts that gnawed at her resolve. She had seen what power could do, how easily it could corrupt, how quickly it could destroy everything in its path. Still, the crystal had spoken. The energy had chosen them. And if the multiverse was at stake, if the very foundation of reality was unraveling, then she couldn't afford to turn away. She had to trust Musk, at least for now. The hallways of the bank stretched endlessly before them, the weight of their responsibility growing with each step. They passed by vaults that held artifacts of untold power, relics from other worlds, each more dangerous than the last. The vaults were silent now, their usual hums and pulses muted, as if the very space was holding its breath. The crystal had changed everything, and the bank itself felt different, as if it was aware of what had just transpired. Sarah's mind kept returning to the question, what had they really set in motion? She had always believed in the bank's purpose, to protect, to safeguard the delicate balance of the multiverse. But now, she wasn't so sure. Had they been too cautious? Had they allowed fear of the unknown to stop them from acting sooner? Or had they acted impulsively, driven by a vision that might be too grand, too dangerous to realize? Her thoughts were interrupted when they reached the central chamber, the heart of the bank. It was the most sacred space, the repository of the most powerful and dangerous artifacts in existence. Here, the walls were thick with the energy of the multiverse itself, the power of countless dimensions compressed into one place. And at the center, surrounded by protective barriers, stood the artifact they had just unlocked, the crystal. Musk stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the artifact. "This is where it all begins," he said softly. "This is where the true work starts." Sarah watched him, wondering if he fully understood the weight of what he was saying. "What's the plan?" she asked. "How do we restore balance? How do we prevent the collapse of everything?" Musk's gaze remained fixed on the crystal, his face unreadable. "We start by understanding the crystal. It's a key, a bridge between worlds. It's not just an object, it's a conduit. If we activate it again, we can begin to realign the dimensions, to set the multiverse on a new path." Sarah frowned. "And what if we make a mistake? What if this isn't the solution?" "There's no such thing as a perfect solution," Musk replied, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of uncertainty. "All we can do is our best. We can't control the outcome, but we can control our actions. And that's what matters." He turned to her then, his expression serious. "We'll need to move quickly. There's no time to waste. The longer we wait, the more unstable everything becomes. We have to act now, while we still have a chance." Sarah's heart raced. The urgency in his voice was palpable. She had no doubt that Musk believed in his cause, but the more she heard him speak, the more she realized that he was willing to take risks that could have catastrophic consequences if things went wrong. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty that gripped her. "Are you sure this is the only way?" Musk didn't hesitate. "Yes. This is the only way to restore the balance." Sarah nodded, her resolve hardening. She had always believed in the mission of the bank, and the importance of protecting the multiverse. Now, it seemed that mission had expanded beyond anything she could have imagined. The stakes were higher than ever before. If they failed, the consequences could be disastrous for every world, every reality, every existence. But if they succeeded, well then, she said, stepping forward, "let's get to work." With that, they moved to the center of the chamber, where the crystal glowed softly, as though anticipating their next move. The air was thick with tension, the weight of their choices bearing down on them. And as Sarah placed her hand on the crystal, she felt a surge of energy pulse through her, a surge that seemed to echo across the multiverse itself. There was no going back now. The crystal's pulse intensified as Sarah's hand made contact, a searing warmth radiating up her arm, filling her body with a strange sensation that was neither painful nor comfortable. It was as though she had just become a part of the universe itself, connected to something far bigger than anything she had ever understood. She could feel the energy rippling beneath her skin, stretching across dimensions, touching distant worlds she couldn't even begin to comprehend. For the briefest of moments, she was overwhelmed by the enormity of it all, but then she found her center again. Musk watched her closely, his eyes intent on every movement. "It's working," he murmured, his voice steady but laced with anticipation. Sarah's mind raced as she focused on the crystal's energy. The raw power she was now attuned to was nothing like she had ever experienced before. It was ancient, unfathomable, and yet it was speaking to her, guiding her, urging her to push forward, to align the threads of reality that had been thrown into disarray. She could sense the imbalance in the multiverse, the way different worlds had begun to spiral out of control, each one pulling at the others, disrupting the delicate fabric of existence. She wasn't sure how much time had passed when she spoke again, her voice thick with concentration. "We need to calibrate the alignment. The crystal is channeling energy from multiple worlds at once, but it's unstable. We can't let it spread too far. Musk nodded sharply. I've already anticipated that. We need to focus the energy, redirect it into a specific channel. If we don't, it could tear everything apart. Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of what they were attempting. The task ahead was more complex than she had initially thought. It wasn't just about restoring balance. It was about controlling the flow of energy, containing the chaos that had been unleashed. The crystal had the power to reshape reality, but that same power could easily spiral out of control if mishandled. She felt the energy shift beneath her fingers again, a tremor passing through the crystal. The vibrations intensified, becoming erratic, and for a moment she feared they had miscalculated. But then, like a bolt of lightning, everything aligned. The chamber was filled with a brilliant light, the crystal now pulsating in rhythm with Sarah's heartbeat. She could feel the threads of reality snapping into place, as though 1,000 different worlds were coming into focus at once. It was a dizzying sensation, one that made her knees feel weak, but she couldn't afford to falter. Musk, we have to stabilize the flow, she called out, her voice strained with the effort of maintaining control. Musk moved swiftly, his hands moving in intricate patterns in the air as he tapped into his own knowledge of the multiverse's complexities. I'm locking the channels. Hold on. Sarah concentrated harder, using every ounce of willpower to keep the crystal's energy in check. She could feel the instability beneath her fingertips, the constant pull of chaos trying to tear through the delicate balance they were attempting to create. The multiverse was fighting back, resisting their efforts to realign it, but Sarah refused to give up. The weight of the task was immense, but she had to succeed. There was no other choice. The hum of the crystal grew louder, reverberating through the very bones of the bank, shaking the walls with its intensity. Sweat beaded on Sarah's forehead, her breath coming faster as the pressure built. She could feel Musk's presence beside her, his energy synchronized with hers, pushing against the tide of chaos. They were doing it. They were stabilizing the multiverse. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the vibration stopped. The crystal's pulse slowed, the overwhelming energy fading into a soft glow that now bathed the room in a serene light. Sarah let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding, her body trembling from the exertion. We did it, Musk said, his voice calm but his eyes betraying the same relief that Sarah felt. For a moment, there was silence. The world around them felt different, quieter, more solid. It was as though the multiverse had taken a deep breath, a pause before the next great shift. Sarah took a step back from the crystal, her hands still tingling from the contact. The task had been completed, but the enormity of what they had just done lingered in the air like a heavy fog. But Sarah knew that their work wasn't over. They had just averted a catastrophe, but they had also set something in motion. The multiverse had been realigned, but it had been a delicate balance to strike. There would be consequences, changes that no one could foresee, and they would have to be ready for what came next. Musk, sensing her thoughts, turned to her with a serious look in his eyes. This is just the beginning, Sarah. We've made a significant step, but we've also exposed something. The crystal is only a piece of a much bigger puzzle. We'll need to stay vigilant. There are forces out there who won't be happy with what we've done. Sarah nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. I know. But we can't let fear dictate our actions. We've done what we believe is right, and now it's up to us to guide the multiverse through this shift. There's no turning back, Musk. The look he gave her was one of quiet understanding. He knew as well as she did that there would be no easy answers, no clear path forward. But they had done something remarkable. They had disrupted the status quo, not with violence or force, but with understanding, with the courage to face the unknown. They had made a choice, and they would live with the consequences, whatever they might be. We'll figure it out, Musk said, his voice steady. Together. Sarah gave a small nod, feeling a renewed sense of resolve settle over her. They had changed the course of history, and while the future was uncertain, she had faith that they were on the right path. The multiverse was vast, its mysteries countless, but Sarah knew that, for the first time, she was not alone in this fight. As they turned to leave the chamber, The hum of the crystal's energy faded into the background. The multiverse had been realigned, but the journey ahead was just beginning. They would face obstacles, opposition, and challenges unlike anything they had encountered before. But they would face them together, resilient, accountable, and committed to the greater good. They had forged a new path, one that would define their legacy for generations to come. And whatever lay ahead, Sarah knew one thing for certain: they would face it with leadership, empathy, and the unwavering belief that they were doing what was necessary for the survival of the multiverse. The bank's chambers were still, almost unnervingly quiet. The aftershocks of their actions had passed, but Sarah could feel the tension in the air. There was a subtle hum, barely perceptible but undeniably there, a constant reminder of the power they had just unleashed, a force now coursing through the very foundation of the multiverse. "We've done it, but at what cost?" Sarah's words were soft, as if she feared that speaking too loudly might undo the work they had just accomplished. Her mind was racing, caught between the triumph of their success and the deep, unsettling feeling that lingered beneath it all. Musk, ever composed, didn't respond immediately. He was still processing everything, the weight of their actions settling in. He had always been a visionary, a man who could see the bigger picture, but even he couldn't have anticipated the magnitude of what they had just set in motion. "The cost is unknown," Musk finally said, his voice steady but tinged with a hint of caution. "But we couldn't let the multiverse spiral out of control. The balance had to be restored, no matter the consequences." Sarah nodded, her gaze drifting to the crystal, still glowing faintly in the center of the room. She could feel the pull of its energy, beckoning her, drawing her in. But she resisted, focusing instead on the task at hand. The crisis had been averted, but they had only addressed one part of the larger problem. As if reading her thoughts, Musk continued, "The multiverse is a delicate system, Sarah. We've stabilized it for now, but there are forces out there who will not be pleased with our intervention. We've upset the natural order, and we'll have to face the consequences." Sarah knew he was right. They had made a bold choice, one that could have far-reaching implications. The balance they had restored was fragile, and there were countless unknowns about what would happen next. But that uncertainty, that risk, was the price of doing what was right. And for Sarah, it was a price she was willing to pay. "We've done what we had to," she said firmly. "We've righted a wrong, Musk. And now, it's up to us to protect what we've created." Musk looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he spoke again. "What do you suggest we do now?" Sarah's mind whirred with possibilities, strategies, and contingencies. They could attempt to consolidate their gains, strengthen the multiverse's stability, or even reach out to other allies, if such allies existed. But she knew that the path forward wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance, forces both known and unknown, who would try to tear down the fragile peace they had just built. "We need to prepare," Sarah said, her voice unwavering. "We need to understand the true scope of what we've done and what could come next. We must secure our position, gather allies, and make sure we're ready for whatever challenges arise." Musk's lips curled into a slight smile, a rare moment of reassurance. "You've always had a plan, Sarah." She didn't return the smile. "Plans are only as good as the will to follow them." The weight of their situation was not lost on either of them. They had changed the course of history, disrupted the very fabric of reality, and now they had to live with the consequences. It was a responsibility they hadn't fully comprehended when they began this journey. "We need to find out who else is out there," Sarah continued. "We don't know who, or what, has been affected by our actions. There could be individuals or factions who've been left behind or displaced by the changes. We need to be ready to respond." Musk nodded, his face growing serious. "I'll start gathering intelligence. We'll need to be vigilant. And we'll need to be ready to lead," Sarah added, her voice firm with resolve. "Leadership is about more than making decisions in the moment. It's about anticipating the future, understanding the consequences of every action, and being ready to adapt." They both fell into a silence, the magnitude of their task settling between them like a heavy fog. Sarah's mind kept returning to the crystal. It had been the catalyst, the source of all this power, but it was also a reminder of how fragile everything was. They had sealed the rift, but there were no guarantees that it wouldn't reopen, or that they had done enough to prevent the inevitable chaos that would follow. "Do you think we've made the right choice?" Musk asked suddenly, his voice low. Sarah didn't hesitate. "I think we've made the only choice we could. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't come with an easy answer." "But at what cost?" Musk pressed. "Sometimes the cost is just what you have to pay for progress," Sarah said quietly. "For the future." Musk studied her for a long moment before nodding. "You're right. The future is all that matters now." And with that, the decision was made. They would press forward, continue to confront the unknown, and safeguard the fragile balance they had restored. There would be risks. There always were. But Sarah knew that with Musk at her side, they had the strength to face whatever came next. They had the power to reshape the future, and they would not shy away from the responsibility that came with it. But even as they moved forward, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their journey had only just begun. The multiverse was vast, full of mysteries and dangers they hadn't yet begun to understand. They had made a difference, but there was still much to be done. And she would do whatever it took to ensure they succeeded, because the stakes were higher than ever before. They weren't just protecting their world, they were safeguarding the future of countless others. It was a mission that would define them, challenge them, and change them in ways they couldn't yet fathom. The real work was about to begin. And Sarah was ready. The next few days were a blur of activity, strategy, and constant vigilance. Sarah and Musk worked tirelessly, analyzing every possible outcome and preparing for the worst. The multiverse was a delicate balance, one that they had managed to stabilize, at least for now. But as they dug deeper into the implications of their actions, it became clear that their work had only just begun. Sarah had always been a problem solver, a person who thrived under pressure. But this felt different. The weight of their responsibility pressed on her shoulders, and she found herself awake at odd hours, staring at the crystal that had changed everything. It was a symbol of power, but also a reminder of the consequences that came with wielding that power. Musk, ever the visionary, was already thinking ahead. He had begun gathering intelligence, reaching out to sources both within and beyond their reality. The multiverse was vast, and there were far more entities and factions out there than they had anticipated. Some might be allies, others enemies, but either way, they needed to understand who they were up against. "We need to find the players," Musk said one evening, his voice calm but firm. "Who has been watching us? Who's been affected by our actions? We need to know who we're dealing with." Sarah nodded in agreement, her eyes scanning the data on the holographic display in front of her. It was a puzzle, one that had many pieces, but no clear solution. The rift they had closed was a fracture in the fabric of reality, and while they had sealed it, the ripples it created were still being felt across the multiverse. The question was not just about who had been affected, but how, and what it would mean for their future. "We need to approach this carefully," Sarah said. "We can't afford to make any mistakes. Any misstep could send things spiraling out of control again." Musk's expression hardened. "I understand the stakes. But we don't have time to be overly cautious. Every moment we wait, more opportunities for chaos emerge." Sarah met his gaze. She knew what he meant. The longer they hesitated, the more likely it was that someone would try to exploit the unstable power they had unleashed. But rushing in without full understanding was a risk she wasn't willing to take. The balance they had restored might be fragile, but it was still their best shot at stabilizing the multiverse. "We'll move fast, but we'll be strategic," Sarah said, her tone decisive. "We need to gather intel, strengthen our position, and only act when we're sure of the consequences." Musk nodded, though his eyes were filled with a sense of urgency. "Time is something we might not have much of." The next few days were a blur of meetings, briefings, and coordination. They had formed a small team of trusted allies, individuals who had the skills and knowledge to navigate the complexities of the multiverse. Sarah and Musk worked closely with them, forging alliances, collecting information, and trying to understand the forces at play. There were whispers of a larger conflict, one that extended far beyond the small realm they had touched. And though they couldn't yet see the full picture, they knew that their intervention had put them at the center of something much larger. But as they worked, the weight of their decision continued to press on Sarah. She had always been someone who believed in doing what was right, no matter the cost. But now, more than ever, she wondered if they had made the right choice. The consequences of their actions were still unfolding, and no one could predict where it would all lead. One evening, as Sarah sat alone in her quarters, staring at the stars outside the window, a knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Sarah?" It was Musk's voice, calm but serious. She stood and opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, a look of determination on his face. "We've found something," he said, his voice low. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "A lead," Musk replied. "A faction we didn't know about. One that has been watching us. And they're not happy about what we've done." Sarah's stomach churned. She had known that they weren't the only ones affected by the rift, but this confirmation was sobering. A new player, an unknown threat, one that might seek to undo everything they had worked for. "We need to be ready," Sarah said, her voice tight. "We don't know who they are, or what they want. But we can't afford to take chances." Musk's eyes hardened. "We won't." The discovery of this new faction changed everything. It was a reminder that the multiverse was far more complex than they had initially realized. They were no longer just dealing with the immediate aftermath of their actions. They were now facing the repercussions of a much larger game, one that would require them to adapt and evolve in ways they hadn't anticipated. The days that followed were filled with intense preparation. Musk and Sarah worked closely with their team, building defenses, gathering allies, and planning their next moves. They knew they were walking into uncertain territory, but there was no turning back now. The consequences of inaction were too great. As the pressure mounted, Sarah found herself leaning on her leadership skills more than ever before. She had always prided herself on her ability to stay calm under pressure, but this was different. This wasn't just about solving problems. It was about leading a team through a crisis, about making decisions that could alter the course of history. And every choice they made carried weight. But despite the fear and uncertainty, there was also a sense of hope. They had faced impossible odds before, and they had come through stronger for it. This time would be no different. "We've got this," Sarah said, more to herself than anyone else. "We've already changed the course of the multiverse once. We can do it again." Musk met her gaze, his expression resolute. "Let's make sure we do." And with that, they set their plan into motion, fully aware that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. But they were ready. They had to be. The stakes were higher than ever before, and there was no turning back. The tension had been mounting for days, every hour stretching longer as Sarah and Musk prepared for the unknown threat lurking in the shadows. They had done everything they could to strengthen their position, but despite their best efforts, the sense of uncertainty never seemed to fade. Every moment felt like a countdown, and with every new piece of information, it became clearer that their enemies were closer than they had imagined. They had been wrong about one thing: the threat they were facing wasn't just about the multiverse. It was personal. There was a figure behind the resistance, someone who had a direct interest in disrupting the balance they had worked so hard to establish. This wasn't just a fight for control. It was a fight for power on a scale they hadn't anticipated. "Sarah," Musk said one evening, breaking the silence between them, "I think it's time we take the fight to them." Sarah had been poring over the data, trying to make sense of their enemies' movements. It wasn't easy. This new faction was elusive, like shadows in the fog. They hadn't made any major moves yet, but Sarah could sense the storm brewing. She had been waiting for a signal, some indication that their enemies would reveal themselves. It seemed that time had finally run out. "We don't know enough about them," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the nerves swirling inside her. Going in without all the information is a gamble we can't afford. Musk looked at her, his gaze intense. The longer we wait, the stronger they grow. And the longer we wait, the more dangerous they become. Sarah's mind raced. She knew Musk was right. Every minute they hesitated could cost them dearly. But she also knew the stakes were too high to rush in blindly. They needed to act, yes, but they needed to be smart about it. We don't have the luxury of making mistakes anymore, Sarah said, her voice firm. We'll take action, but we'll do it on our terms. Musk didn't argue. He understood the weight of her words. The choices they made now would determine everything. There was no room for error. Together, they convened with their team, briefing them on what they knew and what they had planned. Every member of their group had been carefully chosen for their unique skills, and now they would put them to the test. It wasn't just about gathering intelligence anymore, it was about making a stand. They had to confront the forces that were threatening the multiverse and, more importantly, their newfound power. The first step is to uncover who's behind this, Sarah said, her tone sharp. We've got to expose the mastermind and cut off the head of the snake. Once we know who they are and what they want, we can form a strategy to neutralize them. The group nodded, understanding the gravity of the task ahead. Musk spoke next, his voice resolute. We don't just need to outthink them, we need to outlast them. We're not in a race to win this fight. We're in it for the long haul. The team dispersed, each member carrying out their part of the plan. As the hours passed, Sarah felt a growing sense of urgency. They had no idea what kind of power they were up against, no way of knowing how far their enemies were willing to go to undermine their efforts. But one thing was certain, they couldn't afford to fail. As Sarah reviewed the data once again, her thoughts turned inward. Leadership had never been this heavy before. It was more than just about strategy or tactics. It was about the lives of countless beings across the multiverse, about protecting the balance they had so carefully restored. If they lost this fight, the consequences wouldn't just be personal. The multiverse itself could unravel. She glanced over at Musk, who was standing quietly by the window, his mind clearly elsewhere. He was a brilliant strategist, a visionary who had always been ahead of the curve. But even he couldn't predict the full scope of what they were about to face. Are you ready for this? Sarah asked, her voice soft. Musk turned to her, his expression unreadable. After a long pause, he answered, I've always been ready. But that doesn't mean I don't understand what's at stake. We're doing this because we have no other choice. Sarah knew exactly what he meant. They had come too far to turn back now, and the risks had grown too large to ignore. But the path ahead was treacherous, and every move they made would be scrutinized. They couldn't afford to make a single mistake. We've prepared as much as we can, Sarah said, her resolve hardening. Now we have to trust our instincts. With that, they set their plan into motion, knowing that the outcome of this battle would shape the future of the multiverse. They were walking into the unknown, but they had no choice but to face it head-on. The weight of their decisions would follow them, but they were determined to carry it, to see this through to the end. As they moved forward, there was no longer any room for hesitation. The lines had been drawn, and they were on one side, fighting for the balance, for the future, for the countless lives that hung in the balance. They knew what was at stake. They had chosen their path, and now they would fight to the end.